Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen saying the U.S. considering new sanctions on Iran in response to last weekend's strikes on Israel. Yellen saying the administration also considering ways to further restrict Iranian oil exports. Joining us right now is Harvard University's Meghan O'Sullivan, who serves as director of the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs and Kennedy School's Geopolitics of Energy Project. She's former Deputy National Security Advisor and serves on the Secretary of State Blinken's Foreign Policy Advisory Board. I want to thank you for joining us. It's great to see you this morning. Meghan, I think we're all trying to understand where this whole situation goes next and what the role of the United States can or can't be, what kind of influence we even have on the situation as it stands right now.
Great. Good morning. It's great to be with you, Andrew. The U.S. has a very significant amount of influence on the situation. Of course, it doesn't have full control. Israel is its own entity. It's not a proxy of the United States, and it will make its own decisions. But the Biden administration and the larger international community really does have the ability to set a framework that can influence the very intense internal debate going on within Israel right now about how to respond. It being the Biden administration and its European partners and other allies will stress that it is possible to hold Iran accountable for the attacks on Saturday without a big Israeli military response. And that is the real intense focus of not only the Biden administration, but other European officials right now.
The reason I asked the influence question is we have already gone from a situation where, well, let's say even before what happened over the weekend, it's unclear, maybe I'm being polite, unclear whether President Biden's message to Netanyahu on some of the efforts in Gaza and were the appropriate way to go. And, of course, Netanyahu continued. Over the weekend, the president, at least according to the readout of the phone call that we all got publicly, was that he said, take this as a win and there's no need to retaliate at all. And now, of course, we're having a conversation about retaliating. And that was really the background to the influence question about what kind of leverage we really have in all of this. You know, you could have thought, or I would have thought, given all we did even over the weekend to help Israel, that might have actually given us a better relationship, more influence, but it doesn't appear to be the case.
Well, I'd say a couple of things. First, on the retaliation question, in my mind, there is no question that Israel will respond in some fashion, that it will need to, both in terms of its domestic politics, but more importantly, in terms of regional dynamics. But what that response looks like, what timeline that's on, what mode it takes, I think is still open to question. And that's where the debate is happening. In terms of your point, I think it's true that what the United States did alongside other Europeans and even with the help of some Arab states was very forceful in saying to Israel, this can be a new strategic position for Israel in the region. And that holds weight within Israel. Whether it holds sufficient weight to keep Israel from doing something that may escalate this further is still unknown. I think what we did see this weekend is that even though we have a clear falling out between Bibi Netanyahu and President Biden, that the U.S.-Israel relationship is still very strong. So there is still the ability to, make the case that Iran can be held accountable. And I think that if I were an Israeli leader, you can't dismiss that. And you can't also dismiss the Arab state cooperation that we saw, which is important, significant, but also fragile. I had one Arab leader say to me that the continuation and the deepening of these partnerships that we saw manifest on Saturday night really depend on Israeli restraint. So if Israel wants to capitalize on this new reality, it will require a calibration of their response.
Do you believe that if there is a retaliation, that you could retaliate, if you will, without escalating and creating more retaliation?
Well, of course, I believe that there is a world in which that is possible, right? Retaliation does not have to mean the most serious kind of retaliation is something that is being considered and advocated by some, which would not only be Israel striking in Iran, but striking after Iran's nuclear facilities, taking this as an opportunity to do something that Israel has seen as a threat for a long time. That's the most extreme. But there are also non-kinetic responses. There are cyber responses. There there are diplomatic responses. I think Israel will want to go beyond the diplomatic,
Right.
but I think exactly how far it goes towards the extreme side of the spectrum is very much an open question. And whether this escalates, again, there are two parties in this conflict, and so some of that will have to do with
Right.
how Iran sees its options as
How
well.
much of this is performative? And, someone described even what Iran did over the weekend as performative, insofar as that it was telegraphed, if you will, for days prior. Having said that, of course, there were many missiles and drones in the air, and if one of them had struck, it would not have been as performative. But how do you think about that word even?
Yeah, I know this is a debate. I feel very strongly, or come out very strongly on the side that it's very hard to look at the scale of this response and consider it performative. I think that the collective response of Israel, the United States, Arab states, the UK couldn't have been taken as a given, and certainly Iran was taking a huge risk in waging that kind of response. What we can see from that response is that Iran, although it may not want a larger war, it is willing to take the risk that a larger war would develop because it sees it as essential to establish itself and to make clear to the world that it is a rising power in the region, that it is a power that can protect its interest, that it will respond to the attack in Syria that happened 10 days prior. Iran sees itself as a threshold nuclear
Right.
state. It sees itself as part of this emerging partnership with Russia, China, North Korea. Russia is courting Iran now rather than the other way around. And in light of this new feeling of power that Iran has in the region, it felt it needed to respond, was willing to
Right.
take a risk of wider
Meghan,
action.
what you just talked about Russia and China, and we had David Sanger here, who has a new book out on what he describes as the new Cold War, which is a fascinating read. But look, we have obviously a terrible relationship with Russia for a lot of the right reasons. We have this different type of relationship, at least we say we have a different type of relationship with China. Do we have any influence or leverage with the Chinese as it relates to what's happening in the Middle East and the pressure points and leverage that they may have with Iran?
Yeah, I think our leverage is quite limited. And one of the striking things that's emerging from the last couple of days is the shift in the Chinese stature towards what's happening in the Middle East. You saw Wang Yi, China's top diplomat, talking to regional actors, calling for calm and de-escalation, but coming out very squarely on the side of Iran. And that's different. In the past, when these things have escalated, China has made clear that Iran should take limited measures, and that in the past, when Iran has threatened to close the Straits of Hormuz, China's economic interests have kicked in, and they've come down very clearly against that. We do see a different dynamic now, where Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China are working together in concert in a way that we have not seen before.
Right.
And as a result, China, I think, is going to be much more allergic to any kinds of Western, U.S., Israeli reaction in effort to try to put additional pressure on Iran. And this, I think, calls into question how effective some of the sanctions are that we heard National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan in a statement last night saying that the world should expect in the coming weeks on missiles and drones, particularly on military technology. Without Russia, China, this is going to have more limited effect than it might be in the past, where Russia and China had cooperated on exerting a certain amount of pressure on Iran's military capabilities.